And the even more ridiculous thing is, I say a lot of stupid stuff.
This is Faith and, a Christian podcast exploring faith in real life with young people. Welcome back to another special edition of Faith and. I'm Andy as always, and I'm joined here once again by Ruth.
Hello, how are we all doing today?
Very well, thank you. And we are joined from an international speaker today, someone who is miles away from where we are. The wonders of modern technology is allowing us to speak to Rebekka. So, Rebekka, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent. Whereabouts in the world are you, Rebekka?
I am in Germany.
So, Rebekka, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you?
Yes.
What do you do? How do you spend your time?
So I'm Rebekka and I'm 19 years old. I used to work with Andy, but unfortunately through Corona and all that's going on now, I had to go back to Germany. And I'm still doing my gap year, but obviously I can't really do the work anymore or go into schools. So I just sit in my room all day and try to be productive.
And what are you going to do once your gap year's over and summer's over and the world is back to normal?
I plan to start studying psychology. I just hope that works out.
So, Rebekka, tell us one surprising fact that not many people know about you.
I really had to think about this one because, I don't know, like there are so many facts that nobody knows about me, but they are not very interesting or surprising or anything. So, I don't know, maybe that my second name is Anna. I don't think anybody really knows that, or I wouldn't really tell anybody, so...
So, Rebekka, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your childhood, and specifically about your journey with God?
Yeah, I don't think I had a very interesting childhood, to be honest. I mean, like, we moved a lot. That was quite interesting, I think, about 5 or 6 times. So, yeah, that was a bit difficult because we didn't really have the time to settle in somewhere, and I always had to leave my friends behind, so that was quite hard, obviously. But we didn't have any serious diseases or anything in the family, so that's nothing I could tell you about. Then I also had to change schools sometimes, but not that often. And eventually I kind of had my friend circle, so not too exciting. And I think God was always with me during this journey. Obviously, sometimes it was a bigger instance in my life, and sometimes I just lived, and he was there somewhere, but I wouldn't really pray often or read my Bible. And it was just, because my parents were Christian, and we were raised that way. There was not really a time where I wouldn't think God existed, but there were obviously times where I didn't really care much about it. And I think that didn't really make us go to church. We obviously went to church sometimes, but also because we moved so often, we didn't really have this one proper church where we would go to every Sunday, and we didn't really have the community around us. So that was a bit difficult. And now we have a church, but we don't go very often because it just never became this church you would go to and meet other people. And it didn't really feel right because they were very old and traditional. And so that was quite difficult. And I just hope that as soon as I go studying, I find a church that fits better to me.
That's really interesting. I wonder what things are you looking for in a church? Because you've said that you're not drawn to going to church because it's quite old and traditional. So when you do move, what kinds of things are you looking for in a new church that you think are important?
I think one thing that makes a big difference for me is the worship part. If the worship is just, I don't know, if it is lively and just makes more sense and kind of fills me with something, I feel more motivated during the whole service. And I'm not very good at listening for a very long time when, for example, the subject is not super interesting or doesn't really apply to my life. So I just need those breaks of worship during the service to wake me up and remind me, okay, I'm still here for God, and I'm still here because I want to learn something. And if the worship is just kind of a bit slow and boring and always the same songs, nothing new, I don't know, I feel like I'm stuck in this service loop forever, and yeah, that's not what I want.
When you're being moved around the country, when you're not able to go to a church that you find really good at the moment, or you find churches around you just really traditional, how do you receive from God? How do you maintain that relationship with God?
I think when I went to Barrow, this was a time where I strengthened my relationship quite a bit, because obviously I had people who believed in God all around me all the time, and I spoke about it very often. But I think before that, I wasn't really in a very close relationship to God. Of course, there was this relationship, and it was strong enough that I decided to go to Barrow, because I still believe in him, and I was convinced that he is there and that I should live my life more according to his promises. But I don't know, I just didn't really apply it very much to my life, I think.
A lot of us feel that way, don't we? Or we certainly go through ups and downs in our life,
Yeah.
of feeling close to God and feeling far away from God. Do you think there has been any pattern in your life of when you have felt closer to God or when you felt further away? Have there been any things that have pushed you away or drawn you closer?
I think it really helped me to have some friends who also believed in God, because then I was not the only one, and it just felt more real when I could talk to people my age, because I didn't really feel like the outsider, and I had other people who were my age and could talk about the same stuff and believed in the same stuff. So that was very, very helpful. I also think I had an advantage because my parents believed in it and my whole family, so I didn't really have to fight against them and say, oh yeah, I still believe in it, I don't care what you say. So they also supported me with that. And yeah, I think also some people from church helped me, even though the church community itself was not what I was looking for, but there were some specific people who would also help me during that journey.
I read a book about young people being disappointed with God, but actually they weren't disappointed with him. They were disappointed with the expression of God they were finding. So the church they had. And I think there's a balance between those two, isn't there? Between, being disappointed with who God is, or actually are we disappointed with what we see, the churches around us and things like that?
Yeah, I think there are definitely times where I've been very disappointed in God, but I don't know if it was really because of the church around me. I think it was more about myself, because as I told you, I didn't really have this close relationship to a church, but obviously I have a close relationship to myself. And like there were times where I was really disappointed or very depressed about something. And then my first instinct would be, oh yeah, God, how could you let that happen? But in reality, there were ways I could have prevented it to go that far. So yeah, I definitely think there have been times where I was disappointed.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd just like to ask you about why you came to Barrow. So you said that before that you didn't really have a very close relationship with God. So you obviously believed in him, and as you've said, you believe that he called you to Barrow. But what was it that really provoked that decision, and what was it that made you know it was God calling you there?
I think my first thought was that I didn't want to start studying right away, because I just finished school and it was very exhausting and everything. And I also kind of had this learning and writing exams and everything all the time. And I wanted to do something new. So a gap year was what I was going through. And then my mother suggested it to me, and first of all I was not really convinced because I don't know, a whole year somewhere else was a very big step, and and then I talked to some people from Pace, and it really seemed very convincing and very appealing to me to do that for a year. And I think I also kind of felt like I owned it to God, or I should do it because I felt a bit guilty probably because I wasn't really living according to his ways. And then there was this chance to do this gap year and to come closer to God again. So that was probably my inspiration.
That's really great. I think that's a really exciting and encouraging story for lots of young people to hear, that you may not have been in the best place with that relationship, but you took that step of faith, a little bit of a risk, and God was there, and God was in that, and he was part of that, and still is, as your gap year hasn't gone as you've expected it either, that you've gone back to Germany halfway through because of this crazy thing that's happening in the world. But yeah, I think that's really encouraging, so thank you for sharing that.
So what tips would you have for young people who are feeling distance from God, who are in churches where maybe they're finding it boring, maybe they don't have the style of worship they want or the teaching they want at this precise moment? What could you say to them?
I think for me it was very, very helpful to have other people around. So I think if they believe in God and they know of someone else who also believes in God, and maybe goes through the same thing, then it can be very helpful to talk about it together and maybe find a new church, at least to go to some worship nights or something, to have this input. And even if you can't go to every Sunday service, just find your input somewhere else. And also there are great opportunities to watch something on YouTube, which I discovered especially now during Corona, because obviously you can't go to services anymore. But there are very, very good YouTube channels where pastors are talking about God, and they make it very, very good, and they give you great tips. So even though you can't have this community with other people in a church, it can be very helpful to still get this input or talk to someone your age about it.
Good advice. I'm sure that'll be really useful for a lot of our listeners. So thank you for coming to talk to us. We're going to wrap up the episode here and talk to you more next week about your relationship with God, that journey you're going through at the moment, as we all are, and see what we can learn from you and what you have to tell us. So thank you everyone for listening. This is Faith and with Ruth and Andy, and we will see you all next week.